don't give a fuck. You're tripping with JJ.
Wow!
Fuck you, asshole.
Tell your bitch I said hi, nigga.
We're talking about mental health. That's the issue, right? The solitary conditions of the person serving the military. The issue is their mental health, right? If you're in solitude is an issue because it affects your mental health. If you have an issue with that, then why do you troll athletes that are trying to help their own mental health? Like, so that for me, it's like, you don't have to like someone, but just own that. But if you really care about, January 6th people, they're like in confinement, they only have an hour of sunlight a day. So do you care about mental health or not? Because that's what you're talking about, unless you don't know what the hell you're talking about.
Right.
Right?
Right. How do you feel about prison reform? There's a lot of people locked up that possibly, allegedly, did not do the crime.
I mean, right. Like, allegedly, yes, currently, but there's like historically so many people that have been acquitted because the constant advancement of DNA and technology, like literally the year I was born, DNA, you had to have such a huge sample of DNA to even perform tests. And if you did perform a test, you could no longer use the DNA ever again. I know this because I watch way too much crime TV. And today, I'm not an expert. I've just always been very enamored with this topic, right? Today, there are people getting acquitted for crimes because DNA has constantly advanced and technology has constantly advanced, right? This is such a great thing. There are so many people in prison and in jail. Those are two different things, which a lot of people don't know that. There are so many people that are not guilty of the crime that they're being accused of. That's just true. And then there's also people in jail and in prison that are being held captive because of nonviolent crimes, which some people are like, well, if you're a criminal, you should be in jail. But it's like, if you smoked weed 3 times and got caught, you're in jail for life. No, you should not be. Listen, your taxes are paying for that, folks. Just so you know, these are nonviolent crimes. This person just wanted to get high, and their parents were probably alcoholics, and they were probably abused, and they were probably in a bad neighborhood. They should not be in prison. They should be getting counseling. If you want to pay for something, if you want your taxes to go to something, maybe they shouldn't be going to our prison system. Maybe they should be going to like government therapy. A government therapy funded treatment center. I don't know. There were many years I didn't get therapy because I couldn't afford it. And I'm like, listen, y'all are just lucky I'm not a psycho killer. You're lucky that I'm an empath, right? And I'm actually an introvert. Because if I had fallen a different way, I could have ended up like other people in my family, which I won't get into. And I could have been killing people, assaulting people, abusing people. Because I saw it. I saw it in my own family. And a lot of us have. I happen to land differently, and I'm an empath, and I care, and I don't want to be like that. So I'm trying to figure it out. So for me, I'm like, listen, some people should be in jail, for sure. Some people should never walk the streets again.
Specifically.
Some people, and we talked about this. I think there are some deviant behaviors. I think there are certain like sexual crimes. I don't know from what I've seen and read and researched. I don't know if you can rehabilitate that stuff. And I don't know if they should be out on the street. Because in those specific situations, these aren't crimes that it's like, well, okay, somebody might have an anger problem. I just spoke about this recently to somebody. Maybe you're in a relationship where you're an abuser, where you've hit your partner. I'm not saying I agree with it or I support it, but in those situations, there probably are things triggering that behavior. Maybe you cannot be around alcohol. Maybe you need a structure in your relationship. This is not me condoning the behavior. I'm saying, just like with alcoholism or drug addiction, there are certain things, if you're an alcoholic or drug addict, you probably shouldn't have like open access to like your smartphone or like public transportation where you can just go downtown and buy stuff, right? As an alcoholic, you probably just shouldn't go to a bar ever. You shouldn't go to just random social gatherings where there's going to be alcohol. You shouldn't, because people are too casual about it. If there's someone walking around with martinis to all the guests, you shouldn't go to a situation like that. That's just what it is. That's your addiction. You shouldn't be there. Okay. But if you're somebody that like you have an affinity for like young girls or boys, that's just the world we live in. So no one's going to be able to like protect you from being around young girls and boys or women with blonde hair. Like that's the world. So when I say I don't know if it can be rehabilitated, what I'm saying is if you have an affinity for that type of deviant behavior, the world is not responsible for protecting you from the fact that you want to abuse and assault and kill somebody because they have blonde hair. Like you probably, if you've committed the crime, you probably should not be on the street. Now, I'm not going to say you're a criminal because you've had thoughts. That's just what we're a democracy. You cannot accuse someone of a crime because they had thoughts. We all have fleeting thoughts. But if you've acted out on the crime and it's apparent that, okay, this is deviant behavior and this is your temptation, the world isn't a bar. Like children are not a shot glass. You probably shouldn't be out there. You should probably be in a controlled environment. As far as prison rehabilitation, yeah, there's a lot of things in our current prison and jail system that are just not acceptable. And depending on who you ask, I believe in rehabilitating criminals. Now, that is on the same ticket of me saying some behaviors I don't believe can be rehabilitated. That's not my opinion. That's like statistically, and if you look at history and you look at studies and you look at behavioral patterns throughout history, just go watch The Last Duel. Like this stuff happens. But I think that if you're going to send someone to prison to be rehabilitated so that when they come out in 60 years, they can actually serve society, you actually need to set it up not to be a business where we are like building like mattresses and like textiles and we're using prisoners to build our economy, which is what we do in the US, which is disturbing. That doesn't rehabilitate a criminal. That just shows them, hey, if I do this and I say the right things, I'll get out and I can just do my thing as long as I have a skill set. That's disturbing.
Right.
You
now,
know?
You have a law that's going into place, possibly, maybe, hopefully fucking not, where you have transgender that's going to be able to use the same bathroom as your child, as a 7-year-old, as a 5-year-old, as a 3-year-old.
We talked about this before. I'm ready. Come at me. Bring it.
Do you support any law that allows a transgender to go into the same bathroom as your 5-year-old? How do you feel about that?
Okay, how do I feel about that? That's the question.
That's the question.
Or is it, do I support it? Which one is it?
We could go
Those
with
are
both.
different.
Both.
Those are different questions.
Do you support it?
Okay.
And how do you feel about it?
At the current moment, I don't know that I support that. I don't know. I don't know the details of the law in place or the proposed bill. I don't know the details.
Okay, but
And this is Arizona, not Texas.
if you at the airport and your 7-year-old or 14-year-old, 15-year-old, 16-year-old says, Mommy, I need to go to the bathroom. I'll be right back. And you happen to
see something.
witness a transgender, which you can clearly identify because you have experience, go into the same bathroom as your daughter. Let's say you have a daughter. You go into the bathroom as your daughter. How would you feel about that individual going into the same bathroom as your daughter, knowing he is a male?
Okay, so this, I think a person has to be somewhat of a critical thinker to really hear me on this. I kind of spoke on this previously with you, and I feel the same way. And I'm not even as inebriated as I was last time. So, although I think I might be almost up for another one. But this is how I'm going to answer this. And then I'm going to get into the other context, the other specific questions. So, my partner's youngest daughter, we've gone to the gym together. She didn't feel comfortable changing in front of the adults in the locker room. And I was like, you don't have to ever. And as a matter of fact, I covered up. I was born scientifically as a, quote, woman, and I am still the same person I was born as physically. So I was trying to say that as, like, non-judgmental as possible. But I said that to her, and it had nothing to do with the other people in the locker room. It was about her comfort level. And me being an empath, I was like, you know what? There's no, even though we're close, like, there's no reason, like, she should be exposed to me just because I'm comfortable. It's not when you're an empath, you don't think like, oh, is this good for me? You think about, well, what do other people feel? So I told her, you can like walk in that shower with your clothes on. I remember going to national training camps and India was in town and they would literally go in the shower in their clothes because they were raised different culturally than Americans. Like American athletes, you go in the locker room, you just whatever. But like other cultures will come and be like, they'll go in the locker room and literally shower with their clothes on. Like it's like when you shower with a swimsuit on. That's like how it is.
That's normal. Which
is interesting, and that just shows you that when you see other parts of the world, you realize that other parts of the world are not like you, and it's just different other places. And it just expands your mind, just like that, right? Specifically what you're saying. Now, I'm going to venture out a little bit, and I'm going to share an example, because I do think if you're a Christian listening to this, this is what we would call a parable. It's like storytelling to get the point across, right?
Right.
In my background, I do have a very strong Christian religion background. So I have a lot of knowledge on this, both textbook and in life. And so I believe statistically, historically, culturally, and in our criminal history and in our system, there's plenty of examples to support this. But in my opinion, I believe that, I don't know the direction this is all going to go. But if I, first of all, I'm not the type of person that would send a child into a bathroom alone ever, because I don't trust anyone enough. But if I were to send like my partner's youngest daughter into a bathroom, and there were all these things I could be worried about if I were to do that. And let's look, what are our main things? Okay, we have like, let's say there's a woman in there that's just whatever using the bathroom, whatever. And then there's a woman in there that's like a con artist that like wants to kidnap a child and send them into trafficking, because we're like in Arizona and that happens here. Well, it happens everywhere. And then there is a transgendered woman in there who just literally doesn't feel like, this transgendered woman was born a man. So I'm out of respect. And I've been around a lot of trans individuals, so I'm comfortable speaking about it this way. But let's say there's like somebody in there that identifies as a woman that was born a male technically. Of all the people I'd be worried about in that bathroom that I sent my partner's youngest child in, it would be like not the transgendered person, because there is nothing to support the fact that this person would attack this child, abuse this child. I mean, for all I know, they're just going in there to go take a piss. And then they're going to wash their hands with soap and water and leave, which is more than I can say than a lot of just like whatever your average quote women, like women bathrooms can get really nasty sometimes anyways.
Now.
So I just want to finish this thought, because I really believe that there are a lot of women that were born women that are still women that are not people I would trust my partner's youngest child around. But I have worked with a lot of trans people that I trust. Why? because they've had to fight for their own safety. A lot of them have been abused, honestly. And then a lot of them just didn't identify with the gender they were born with, and they just didn't want to be that gender, and so they did the work and they changed. So who am I the most concerned about? It has nothing to do with how you identify. It has to do with your behavior. Now, identifying with a gender that is not what you were born with has nothing to do with your deviant behavior. Because there are plenty, and historically, 90% of serial killers are white men, white middle-aged men. That's just serial killers. That's just one niche, right? We're not talking about like all the other deviant behaviors. But if I send my partner's youngest child into a bathroom, I promise you I am not so concerned about the person that's wanted to wear a dress growing up as I am with the person that currently brings multiple men into their home, traffics their children, doesn't pay attention. I mean, I grew up in a situation where the person that raised me did not pay a lot of attention, right? And this person was born their gender and is still their gender, okay? And this person might have an issue with trans people, but I'm like, there's a lot of stuff we could talk about with just you. And you're still the gender you were born as. So you can ask me like, do you think this is okay? And I'm like, well, you're looking at it from this angle. You're looking at it from this 2D perspective or whatever. There's 1D, 2D, 3D, and then you can keep going.
Right.
So if you're choosing to look at it from that perspective, yeah, like I can see how that might be problematic. Like, I don't want my daughter to see that. But like, there's a lot of other stuff that your daughter sees just being on TikTok. And you're fine with them having TikTok. You're fine with them having this, that, and the other. You're fine with them staying the night over at someone's house, which, just because of the person I am, the things I've known and the way I'm educated, I've talked about this a lot with my partner, like my fiance. Like, I'm like, I don't know if I'll ever be okay with our kids staying the night over at someone's house. That's something I did growing up. That's something I did. I don't know if I'll be okay with that now. And it has nothing to do with how you identify. Or even if you prefer to be in a same-sex relationship or whatever. Like, those are not even the concerns I have. What I look at is like, what does your behavior tell me? Do you look at pictures of children? That would concern me a lot more than a person that's like, I would just rather live as a woman. Like, so, people can have an issue with that, but honestly, how many cases and out-of-court settlements have we seen in the Catholic Church? Okay, so let's look at that. How many cases and out-of-court settlements have we seen with just transgendered people? No, the things that we see in the media are that they show up dead somewhere and they're cold cases because law enforcement doesn't care enough because you're transgendered. I mean, you're choosing to live that life. If you've seen Euphoria, I mean, in that it's a fictional show, but I always tell my fiance, I'm like, if you want to know anything about addiction, watch the show because it's actually pretty accurate. But in the show, there's a transgendered person that is transgendered in real life, and she makes a comment to her friend. She's like, because she's like, why do you put yourself in these situations? She meets up with men at night, right? Wow. These men that have like these fantasies about whatever. And she's like, because I'm transgendered, it's not like I can just go on like Tinder and go on a normal date with somebody. The world hasn't even set up a scenario where I can do that safely. So if I want to interact with somebody in this way, this is how I have to do it. So, people are so judgmental. And I'm like, you haven't even set up a construct for them to live their lives. Like, you're like, well, should they be in our bathroom? Well, you haven't even set up another option. You're just saying go there. And if you go here, you're a criminal. So they're going to be judged no matter where. The two options you gave them. If you're a black person in the 50s, you're a criminal for using the white water fountain, and you are less than a whole human if you use the black water fountain, if you even have one. Right. You've given them two options. You have not given them equality, but you're calling them a criminal because of what you gave them. So, and I'll push back. Like, and again, I don't mean to be difficult, but you asked me a question that's very limited, and I'm like, I'm not saying I agree. I don't even understand. I was born with my DNA and my sexual construct, and I am still the person I was born as for all intents and purposes. I don't totally understand what it's like to be like, should I be a man? I don't understand what those feelings are like.
Right.
Just like I don't understand what it's like to be Hindu. Like, I don't understand what it's like to not believe in God. Now, we're not talking about religion, and I'm not going to get into that. But, you know, if you're a person that just has faith, you don't totally understand what it's like for a person that just is an atheist. You just don't. You don't totally, or someone that believes in a greater power. You might think that they're wrong, but you thinking they're wrong doesn't mean you understand it, and it doesn't mean you have knowledge. It just means you have an opinion.
Right. Now,
I need this Red Bull. Oof, I'm getting tired. I'm like wearing myself out.
Now, depression, anxiety.
Finally, something I understand.
Depression and anxiety is definitely a struggle in a lot of athlete life. And a lot of people don't understand or comprehend that process.
Did you Google me again? Did you do that again? Because last time you asked me a question, I was like, you could have only known that if you dug.
Had to. Now, depression and anxiety play a role in your life. Now, how do you overcome and deal with that for so long? And how do you manage to sustain every single day with that battle?
I mean, for me personally, I think when it comes to mental health, there were just parts of my life that I would, when we're talking about mental health, I would put them in categories like, oh, this was like 2016 to 17, and this is like the quad leading up to London. And I would categorize it because that's how life is when you're like, it's like when you hear a song and you're like, oh, that reminds me of this time in my life. And so for me, having been a professional athlete and struggling with mental health, that's how I would categorize it. I think for most of my life to date, and if you asked me when I was 85 years old, I would give a different answer. Right. Because more of my life had been lived candidly when it came to mental health. But as of now, most of my life, I didn't talk about it. So the fact that I'm candid now, this is just a few years out of my 36 years of being alive. Like I would say, and I've shared this, and it's crazy, but the first time I publicly was in a group of other professional high-level athletes where we talked about mental health, the first time it ever happened, and this was after I went to the Olympics. This was after I had something on my credentials that was like worthy, I guess, and legitimate. This was in 2016. That was the first time I'd ever sat at a round table with other high-level athletes, and we talked about, and I remember it, like I talk about it to people, and I remember sitting there, and I was like, it was like the Twilight Zone. I'm like, are we talking about this? This has never been allowed. I've literally been told by coaches to leave the room if feel like I'm going to fall apart because people cannot see me, the number one athlete, look weak. I've literally been told that.
How did you feel about that?
I mean,
knowing you was going through a struggle.
I felt like I was messed up. And I left the room and I went for a run and cried the whole time. It was awful. And you didn't have the documentaries out. No one talked about the suicides in athletics back then. And if they did talk about it, it was like third, fourth page, right? It wasn't a story. And mostly, if I was lucky, which I was at different times, if you're lucky, you come across a great sports psychologist that kind of sees it and they just go there if you're lucky. But most of the time, you just, because you have nowhere to turn, I think for me, like religion was a great outlet for me. I say outlet, it's not really what I want to say, because it wasn't just like, oh, it wasn't an outlet the way music is an outlet. I believed in it and I was living it. And it was truly like my faith truly like got me through so many times, just because I didn't have any other options. And when you don't have a lot of options, it simplifies things. And growing up in the era that I grew up, no one talked about mental health. I can tell you, if people talked about mental health, I would have talked about it, because it was very evident in my household, very evident. And so since no one was talking about it and it just wasn't available for me to address, I just found ways to get myself to the next step in life. So for me, it was like, well, then I'll be good at the sport and I'll be great at music and I'll get this job and I'll earn an income and I'll not be homeless. And you just find ways to get yourself to the next step. Now people are talking about it, and people are still like complete a-holes about it. I mean, when the stories about Simone Biles came out and all of the I mean, that's like, I think the most well-known, but there were a lot of stories that came out. And years ago, I mean, there's been many athletes that have taken their own lives because of mental health. Unfortunately. And I'm grateful that they were strong enough to do it. And I'm grateful that people in this country and in the world today are more receptive of it than they used to be. Although not everyone is. I don't think we're not even close to arriving. But when all those stories came out surrounding the Olympics specifically, it was triggering for me. I was like stunned into silence many times because of the stuff people would say. People with influence, like really, really well-known names, not necessarily people I support or follow, but I'm like, you just know nothing. You know so little about this. For you to say that, one athlete that I'm friends with made a comment, and this is an MMA fighter, after the Simone Biles story came out, and she kept pulling out of events. And I'm sitting here like, I totally get it. I wish that I would have, I wish I would have just had the wits about me to make those types of choices. Because I think it damaged me to just
sit back,
deny myself, and just do what I needed to do. There's a time for that, sort of, sometimes. But
so, sorry to interrupt you.
No, it's okay.
Some of the choices you made obviously was against your better judgment. And obviously you have regrets about that. What was the biggest one for you? And how did you get through that in hindsight? And would you have done that again?
You know, it's weird because right now I'm in a place where I look at some of the decisions I made, and athletics has such a dominant place in my life right now, because I haven't quite broken through in music or acting yet. And really, as a wrestler, I went to the Olympics. So, for all intents and purposes, I did break through. I did the thing I wanted to do. So it's hard for me to look at other points of my life. It was like about 20 years of my life. It was such a huge part of my life, 2/3 of my life. But I'm in a place right now, where I'm not necessarily at a complete place of hindsight where it's like 20/20 vision. I think I'm at a place now where I'm like, yeah, that wasn't the best decision that I made, but that was the only decision I knew how to make at the time. It was the only decision I had to make at the time that I knew of, that I could have made, you know?
Do you wish you had more support, better guidance, more friendship, more of the administrative staff that was supposedly had your best interests? Did they really had your best interests?
No, I mean, not at all. I think my national governing body, USA Wrestling, I think the Olympic Committee, I think all of these committees and organizations, I mean, I would even argue the NFL, the NBA, all, Major League Baseball, like, these are businesses. They're all businesses. Like, I don't think they have the mental health of their athletes in their best interest. I think if you win gold medals, they really cater to you. And I've seen it. If you win medals, they cater to you. And otherwise, you're tolerated. But if you talk about mental health, I mean, I'm telling you, like, my coach told me to, like, leave the room. Like, my coach, my main coach, right after the Olympics, the guy that was in my corner, this is a person I respect and I've always respected. So, I mean, you might as well have a parent telling you that. I mean, this person had become a parent in a way to me, you know? And so do I think they have that? I think no. I think some of it's ignorance and some of it's that they just care about it's the same reason why rich people fly to space instead of feeding the freaking poor on the weekends. Like, it's because people just care about the business more than it. And it's not, I don't know, it's a double-edged sword, because it's like, well, you can't just walk around only thinking about other people, and we're all different. We all care about different things. And there is a benefit in space travel. There's obviously, we are destroying our planet. We're probably going to need somewhere else to go at some point. But, like, you know, I think it kind of is the same scenario where it's like, yeah, like, of course you care about medals. That's your job. But unfortunately, the people winning medals, some of us have stuff outside of medals.
Did you feel alone then? And do you feel alone now in your battle with anxiety and depression?
Then at that particular time, I felt very alone. But there was other reasons for that. It wasn't just mental health. And I did feel very alone. But it was magnified because I had just made the Olympic team where people celebrated me, and then you come back and then no one cares. And that's sport for you. I mean, that's humans. That's how we are.
Right.
We care 1 second and we don't the next. We're high-speed internet constantly. And but as far as right now, I think I have struggled with those feelings of loneliness, but I think a lot of it, I have support, but I think a lot of it is just I think part of it comes from the fact that I'm realizing how little people know. People really understand. And so I feel like it's more of a realization than it is like, you don't care about me. It's more like I'm realizing how little the most educated people know about mental health. And that in and of itself can make you feel alone. It's not so much that someone's doing something to you. It's more like if you go to war, if you're a Vietnam veteran and you come back in the 60s, nobody at home understands what you saw. And we know the stories. You read about the stories. You can look up the stories right now. It's not that anyone did anything to you. It's just they don't understand what you saw and what you went through. I'm not saying mental health is equal to an experience overseas in war or in combat. What I'm saying, I'm trying to relate this to something that more people know of. I think, it's really war veterans that are why we understand PTSD. I remember when it became a topic of conversation. I remember it. I remember being young and it making perfect sense to me. Of course they're traumatized. Like, I have no clue what they saw. Of course they're traumatized. I've spoken to many. My high school used to do a whole thing for veterans every year, and we spoke to them, and it made so much sense to me when they talked about the pain, even though I didn't get it. And now when it comes to mental health, which can be triggered by so many experiences, I think the loneliness comes from just like, this is just something that people don't understand for different reasons.
You have a lot of athletes currently in the sport, all sports, that they feel alone. They feel like they have nobody. Even though they have people in their corner, okay? What would you say? What would be your advice to people right now who feel alone, dealing with depression and anxiety in a world by themselves, and they have to face that struggle by themselves, what would you say to them?
I don't know if I have the answers to that right now because I don't know if I've even quite gotten there yet. But I think because when I look at the height of my career, I was so clocked in that you couldn't have said anything to even me, you know? And I needed to be clocked in to get to that point. I look back down, I'm like, I look at my friends that are clocked in and they're like killing it in the sports world. And I'm like, that's where you need to be. And I feel, sometimes I can feel offended, like, why don't you care about other things? And I'm like, that's exactly how I was, you know, because that's how you have to be. But, so I don't know if I have the answer, but I guess if I were to say anything, I would say, like, the thing that I normally say is, like, don't get talked out of what you know to be true. You may not be right or wrong. Like, you might be wrong, but I think it's better to do what you feel like you need to do. You have less regrets, and regret's a horrible thing. It's better to do don't go against your conscience. If you feel like as an athlete, this is the path you need to be on it. Also, I think definitely I would say with athletes, like, social media doesn't matter as much as you think it does. And you really need to circle back to what your actual goal is. If you're trying to be famous, that's one thing. But if you're really trying to be the best in the world, that's another thing. Because if you're trying to be famous, that'll affect your mental health in a different way than trying to be great at your sport will. And I think I wasted a lot of time trying to be seen as an athlete. Not as much as others, but still more than I wish I had. I wish I had just not cared at all. But I cared on some level, and I wish I hadn't at all. Because being seen doesn't make you a good athlete. Not in Olympic sports, at least. Maybe pro sports, but not Olympic sports. When I say pro, I mean like basketball, baseball, MMA, like the big money sports. Olympic sports in the U.S. are not big money sports. And then I think not going against your own conscience, not getting talked out of what your instincts are telling you. And that can apply to everything. But I think also just like figuring out what is important to you. Are you using the sport as a ticket to a better life or fame or influence? Or do you just like want to be great at your sport? Because if you're doing what's authentic to you, I think it'll contribute to your mental health. And only you can know what that means or what that looks like. But that's a tough one for me because I don't even know if I figured it out for myself yet. And I retired. I think I'm still trying to figure it out.
Did you lose part of your integrity, part of your identity, part of your self-respect in the process of trying to be the number one athlete in the Olympics?
No.
You lost something. What was it that you lost in the process of being the number one athlete? What did you lose?
So I think the thing that I've had to come to, it's like I've had my come to Jesus moments with, is that I think I've told myself I truly sacrificed so much for this dream, right? I truly gave years and friendships inadvertently. And there's just a lot of things that you sacrifice to be great at anything.
Right. And
I really did put a lot of stuff on hold, especially being a female. There's just things you put on hold. And this is something I realized quicker than I was ready for. I realized that, like, I think I really sincerely thought all the years I didn't do it for some type of return. You don't do it for a return. You do it because you love it and you care about it, and you just assume that there were administrators at USA Wrestling that would say things to me, and I was like, they really care about me, you know? I really felt like they cared. But then then you're not number one, and then you're injured, and then things happen and you realize, like, I thought they cared the way I cared. I thought they wanted me to be as successful as I wanted to be. I thought that we were all on the same playing field. And I think if I lost anything, it was just, I don't know. I'm having a hard time, like, putting this into words. But it is something I've thought about a lot. I think I really thought that, I thought that the sport that I'd given almost 2 decades to, I thought that I would leave feeling a sense like we were in this together, all of us. But what I learned in the later part of my career, and especially retiring, is that athletes are completely disposable. And
unfortunately,
it is unfortunate. And I've had to keep my resentment and all those feelings in check because that doesn't benefit anyone. And I made decisions, right? I think it hurt a little bit because I really, as an athlete, you have to give up everything unless you're just gifted by God, but you really give up a lot. And the administrators and the people above you, the coaches and moving up, they all make more than you, and you're the one out there. I mean, we all know that. That's true of every sport. And I was okay with that. I was okay with that as an athlete, I guess, because I didn't care. I really wanted to be great at the sport. And on some level, I did want to inspire people. But I think if I lost anything, it was just, I lost that naivety. Like, I truly lost that sense of that blissful ignorance of, like, we're all in this together. Like, we weren't. I sacrificed a lot of things to do this, and I fell short of the goals that I had, but I'm not jaded by, like, this idea that, like, they're going to be in my wedding. They care so much. All these things that you think. I don't believe that anymore. I think that there's always going to be another person to fill the weight class, as I've seen in the last year. And I've seen people go high and low, and I've literally seen all of these entities, like, do the same stuff, but we have social media now, and it's just different, and I'm just like, it is what it is.
Now, you dealt with traumatic experiences when you was in the Olympics. And now that you're moving on, you have a family, you have a beautiful family, okay, you're trying to live your life. What has impacted you that's affecting you now in your relationship because of what happened 20 years ago? What is affecting you now? What is it?
I mean, I think that I'm just I can be very, I mean, there's some really obvious stuff. This is just not stuff I'm going to get away with tonight. There's some obvious stuff, like when you fight so long and so hard to be heard, you're not willing to, like, beg for a seat at the table. You're not willing to tolerate a lot of things. Sometimes I can be a little bit intolerant because I think for so long I had to fight for so many things. And even, like, for example, like, if I come across, like, there was a specific incident recently where it was a makeup artist. It was so stupid. They were really unprofessional, but most people would probably blow it off. He would blow it off. Most people would blow it off, but there had been so many years where I'd been punked and I couldn't afford to get punked. And it really, I mean, it was the difference between living on the street and living in a car. Like, I mean, it was like, you go through enough of those situations where you're like, nobody walks all over me. No, this is principle. And I had enough of those experiences that now those aren't, like, it's not, if somebody punks me out of $40, it's not like I'm going to end up homeless, but to me, I can be intolerant because of the principle. And I, even now saying this, I'm like, no, like, I stand by it. But, like, this situation recently, I was about to take this person to small claims court because she really like, it was well documented. Like she was so unprofessional, but it wasn't like an amount of money that meant anything in the scheme of things. But I was like, no. And I do see my experiences in life where I just don't tolerate shadiness. Like if I even sense shadiness, like I don't, and you know, I think that can be useful in some contexts. I really have a strong self-awareness, and I'm just very straightforward and like say it like it is. And it's a very rare occasion for me to go into something not totally certain about the fine print. And it's not like, just because for so long, I couldn't afford better and I had to tolerate crappy people. And you get to a certain point where you're like, I'm not doing that anymore. And I do think that there's a lot of those experiences. I have a lot of stories of that, where now I don't apologize for being rough around the edges. I don't apologize for wanting things in writing. I don't apologize. And I think that has definitely impacted me a ton. Like, and a lot of it is business early on in any industry when you're first building up and networking, and you have to know where you stand on stuff because people will take advantage of you, especially in like the performance industry. And I do think that's impacted me a lot. And sometimes I'm like, thank goodness. And sometimes I'm like, Kelsey, why can't you just chill out? like,
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Now, what are some of the biggest challenges in your relationship now that you cannot even overcome? You need therapy to overcome, but it's not working because you're so traumatized by what happened in your past. What are some of those challenges that you're dealing with now that seems to be hindering progress in your relationship?
Honestly, it's weird because I feel like the different like traumas that I've been through, like I am really, really working really hard to get help on. And I'm truly failing my way forward. So I don't know. Maybe this isn't true to other people, but I feel like there's not anything right now that I can staunchly say like I can't overcome this. Cuz even the things I struggle with the most, I'm really trying hard to not only get help on, but to be candid about. And cuz I think moving forward isn't just being perfect, it's being honest when you mess up. And there isn't a lot of, I can't even think of anything right now in my life where I'm like, yeah, I can't admit when I messed up. Like some of my worst moments, even recently, I'm like pretty honest about. Like that doesn't mean I've overcome them. It just means like you can't overcome things if you're not transparent. And I feel like transparency has been like something that I've worked really hard on. So I don't know if there's anything right now that I'm like, there's no way I can get past this. I think there's things in my life right now that definitely like I need a lot of help, and I do get therapy. And it's funny because even therapy has evolved a little bit, you know, because I remember when I first started, I think it was like 2000. When did I start driving? No, it's okay. When I first started driving, remember the therapist that I was like, sometimes I would show up really late or sometimes I wouldn't show up. And because that's how it is when you need therapy. People that need therapy often miss appointments. And I'm telling, like when you have anxiety and depression, this is something that happens a lot because a lot of times you're anxious and don't want to go to something, and then you get depressed because you're beating yourself up about the anxiety, and then you don't show up. And I remember the therapist I was seeing, I was like, because I had missed like 2 or 3 appointments because I couldn't bring myself to just go. And I go and I was like, I don't know if this happens a lot, and I'm really sorry. I really wanted to be here. It was just hard. And she's like, actually, it happens a lot. And I was like, wow. Like, I realized that's just part of this game.
Right.
So it's not, you know, I think I don't think that applies to everything. I don't think just showing up is the right answer for everything. I think we want to say just show up to a lot of stuff, and that's not true. But I do think when it comes to like certain mental health categories, showing up is so huge. Like,
Right.
you know,
Now, are you your biggest supporter, or do you have someone else that you would give that credit to?
I don't think I'm my biggest supporter. If anything, I'm kind of self-deprecating. I'd say he's a pretty big supporter of me. I would say he doesn't understand everything, but he supports me. I think he probably him and then like my coach that I've talked about a lot. He's one of the few people that like literally still comes to my house and like checks in. Like it's whereas a lot of people in the sports world, once you retire, that's kind of it.
Right.
You know?
Right.
But it's funny because as much as I recognize my own skill sets and my weaknesses and strengths, I actually don't think I'm my biggest fan. I actually think I'm probably like maybe third or fourth on the list.
Now, if it wasn't for therapy, if therapy did not exist in this world, where would you be mentally, and how would that affect your relationship with your family now if therapy did not exist?
Like for anyone or just for me?
For you.
Okay. I think I would probably be journaling and reading a lot more than I do, which is what I did before I had therapy, as I just wrote everything down. Yeah, I think if you don't, which I didn't for many years, when you don't have the option to get help, you don't think, oh, I'm not getting the help I need. You just find the next outlet. You find the next thing. I don't know. It's weird. When you don't have a lot of options, your options are simple. So I heard this quote in a show recently, and this woman, it was Nicole Kidman playing this Russian woman, and it was kind of a stereotypical thing to say that I don't totally agree with, but I could see where it was coming from. And the character made a comment like, in the old days, people were too busy working to be depressed. And I was like, that's not totally accurate, but right? Because there's some truth to it. It's like people were working too much, but we just didn't talk about depression. It's not that people weren't depressed. Because you can see, just look at people's families. It was there. We just weren't dealing it. We were denying it. And I just thought it was so interesting, that comment, because most of my life, until really the last like 2 or 3 years, I worked multiple jobs at a time most of my life, as an athlete, really. And it sucked. And I remember so many times thinking like, I just wish I could just like sleep on the weekends like a normal college student. I remember thinking, I wish I could join a sorority, but I like couldn't afford it, and I didn't have time for it anyways because I was always working, and when I wasn't training and going to class, and which is a lot of people's situation, you know, but I wasn't working to have like an extra, like padding. Like I wasn't doing it to have like something. I was doing it to like survive. I was like I was literally donating plasma. Like I was just trying to pay bills. And I was so busy working that I don't even know when I would have seen a therapist, but also I couldn't afford one anyways because therapy isn't cheap.
Right.
It's cheaper now. But yeah, like I think that I would have just been the person I was before therapy. And I say that in the sense that I'm not like a finished product. You know, I haven't consistently been getting help for my mental health struggles for long enough to even know what the answer to that question is.
In your relationship, in your marriage, are you in love? Or are you just there for not being lonely?
Well, first of all, I'm not married. I'm engaged.
Well, you on the way.
Yeah, that's a funny story too. We could have a whole podcast on that. It's funny, but not in a bad way. Oh, you want some?
Load them up.
I'm sorry. This is like from another country.
Load them up. You want some ice? Let me get some ice.
I don't need ice. He might. This stuff really like burns a hole in your esophagus. Like this stuff is like definitely 63%. You can edit this section out. But
You're fine.
I just got to tell you, man, this stuff like I feel like there's a hole burning in the back of my throat. My dad would be so proud. You're a real Jamaican. I'm not existing. I'm not a person that just exists. But I will say this, and this is not something that...
It's kicking in. It's kicking in.
Hold on, give me a second.
It's kicking in.
He asked me a tough question. I'm like, let me have a... Okay. So this is something that we have discussed a lot.
Okay.
So for me, and I think, you know, I'm not saying this because I'm comfortable talking about it. I'm saying it because I think a lot more people feel this way than would ever admit. And I think it's important to sometimes say things that are uncomfortable because people need to see other people talk.
Right. Absolutely.
It's like every form of trauma that exists. The only reason we don't have more literature is because not enough people talk. And I can give you a ton of examples of this, but in my relationship, you know, there are certain phrases and words that I'm not comfortable with, and I've never been comfortable with in our entire relationship, and a lot of it has to do with my background, not him. And so for me, like, I don't know that I could ever be in a relationship with anybody and just be there because it's stable or secure. All the things I talked about earlier, I don't think I could do that because I'm too, I would hate myself. And I already struggle with enough things. I don't need to also hate myself for that. Like at that point, just let me drive off a cliff, you know? But I do think there are things that I've really struggled being comfortable saying and expressing. And it's not, and I think the world that I live in has, I think there have been a lot of scenarios where I felt bad for not saying certain things or expressing myself a certain way in a relationship. And I feel like the same entities that I felt made me feel bad for not being able to express myself in that way. A lot of times it's the same audience that says, "Oh, you're just depressed again." Like, it's the same people that don't get it anyways.
Right.
And so I think in my relationship, what I've had to come to terms with is like, you know, I know how I feel. He knows how I feel. I don't express myself the way other people might, but I do know that I could never be in the relationship I'm in if I was just doing it to be secure or to be stable, or I could never oh, y'all.
I don't give a fuck. You're tripping with JJ.
Wow!
Fuck you, asshole.
Tell your bitch I said hi, nigga.